Hi, this is Roger, thanks for dropping by. Today I'd like to have a chat about something that might seem incredibly basic and therefore a bit of a waste of time covering, but it could be useful to some people because people use expressions that they just assume everybody knows. Now, we all talk, all us orchid growers and houseplant growers and even some gardeners, we talk about repotting. But occasionally the expression potting on will come up, which I've had at least two people say, "What do you mean?" in reference to orchids. So I thought, as I'm doing one, we'll have a chat about it. And before I start on, this is the giant Masdevallia, what is it? It's Cuculata crossed with Hercules. But this has come from Spiceotic, and obviously they have a spraying routine, or they get stuff in from places that has a spraying routine and don't clean the plants up. But this plant has got a lot of residual something on the leaves. I don't know what, because I didn't do it. It's probably either a pesticide or a fungicide or a mixture of both, who knows. But when it's at that sort of level on the leaves, it's potentially stopping photosynthesis happening as well as it should do, because it's blocking the light. It could even be bunging up some of the pores, the breathing pores. But on orchids, a lot of those are actually on the underside of the leaves. Some are on both. They vary quite a bit, and some are very, very thin on the ground on some orchids. And on others there's loads, so it does vary, but just giving the leaves a clean up brightens the plant up, allows the light to get at the leaves properly, and just makes the whole thing look nicer. See, it's on the underside of the leaves as well, but I wasn't going to bother with that, but it's actually, well, if you think about it, all the instructions for a spray, whether it be an insecticide or a fungicide, say totally cover the plant, don't they? And they say don't forget the underside of the leaves. So yes, one would expect, yeah. But some of the leaves were quite bad underneath and some weren't. So I mean, that one, that's a relatively new growth there, so that possibly missed out on that spray. Yeah, some of these leaves have got hardly anything underneath. So that's cleaned the plant up. That's got nothing to do with potting or repotting. And the next thing I'm going to do, as these blooms have gone over, is take them off. Because in a lot of orchids, the lack of blooms triggers new growths. And at the moment this plant has none. Now, under my normal rules for repotting, I wouldn't repot unless I could see new growths of some description or some new root activity or something. But this is a potting on exercise, so the first thing we've got to hope is that it comes out of the pot quite easily, which it has. Oh goody. Right, next we have a look at what we've got. Now, what we've got is some good roots around the outside of the plant, and in the centre of the plant we have a mass of dead roots. Now I've got to see, now that was unexpected, but now that I've seen it, I've got to deal with it. I don't know how on earth this got like this actually, it's difficult to imagine. But I'm just going to tug at the centre. And that means all the old moss and most of those dead roots have come out. So this has now become a repot rather than a potting on. But had that been good media with good roots, then that rake out of the middle wouldn't have been necessary. So just imagine that it's still there basically, and unfortunately that does mean a sort of rethink because I'm now going to need more media as well. I might not have enough here. Get rid of that old stuff out of the way. And then what's in this bag was what I was hoping to get away with using, but it now might not be enough, basically. But we'll tip it out and see. Now this is what's left over from whenever the last repot was yesterday, which was the mini Cymbidium. And it has got a little bit of peat in it, which I'm not going to worry about because it's not enough to worry about. But it's perlite, some grow stones now, because things get mixed up and put back in the bag because I don't want to waste them. So it's ended up with what we've got here is small bark, grow stones, perlite and some tiny bits of moss. And we want a lot more moss than that. So we'll just put the plant over there out of the way. Stay. And we'll put a lot more moss in with it. That will also bulk it up, so I probably will have enough. The moss I want in smaller pieces than it is currently, because it's now got to get all up in between those roots. So we'll break it up a bit. It distributes easier throughout the media if it's in smaller pieces. I always get the worst of the water out before I use it. Now there's one thing I'm going to do that wouldn't be done on a potting on exercise, but because I'm doing it as a separate entity, you could just sort of think, well, if it was a potting on exercise, that bit wouldn't be necessary. So we can still do this like potting on, even though because of that large dead section. Still a bit there that I'd like to take out, I must admit. Another bit of old. Right, that'll do. Tease away at the top of the plant because there's some old moss around there as well. But that'll do. I don't want to go mad. The older part of the plant here has obviously had quite a bit cut off, and I've just seen my first new growth now that I've cleared the top off. New growth. So there is one coming at least. Now that I can see where they come from, there could be more. But we have a new growth, so we have one. Definite. Just will use up the rest of this moss. So a tiny little bit left. That means I can get that out of the way. Right. Let that stir. Now this is an air cone pot, but because I want this plant in a bit deeper than it was before, because it had a lot of air around the base of the plant, and the roots and the ends of the roots, the growing parts, were in air. They didn't have any media at all. Well, I now want them straight into growing media, so it's not crocking. So I'm actually going to go in with actual media in the bottom of the pot. Right, now this bit, if it was potting on, you wouldn't do. And that is put a handful of media up the centre of the plant, and then hoping it will stay there. And the easiest way to get it to stay there is put the pot onto the plant. Now I know that's there. Then we've got to find where our new growth was, round there. It's actually coming out quite close to the back of the plant, which almost implies new growth could come out anywhere on this plant. Right, now if this was potting on, we would now have our old plant in the pot, yeah? Oldest part of the plant that is unlikely to shoot out towards the back, and that bit doesn't need any moss. And then all we do is leave that there for a minute and get some more moss, because I was going to say what we do now is fold this media in round the plant, but what I'm after is like the odontoglossum type mix, which is very heavy on the moss, and you fold it in round the sides of the pot. An awful lot of sticks in this flipping moss. I must admit, so far we haven't had any thorny bits, because in the old days when I used to use this a lot, you used to end up getting bits of, well, what I would describe as gorse. Very thorny pieces. And of course you're doing this and you end up with a bit in your finger. And it always broke off. Every single time it broke off. So you end up with the spine, you know, the pointy end goes in other person, or in this case in me. Right. It wouldn't have been enough without this moss anyway. These gaps are quite big here. Right. So now we can do what I want to do, which is fold the media down the side of the pot, gently. And then in this case, because these roots were not really getting into much, I am going to gently press it down the sides, but under normal circumstances that would be enough to just fold it in down the side of the pot, like that. Pick it up and make sure you haven't got any big air gaps, because that's really what was wrong with the way this was potted, was the big air gaps. Not ideal for a Masdevallia, not really. Right, I'm just adjusting the centre of gravity basically, so it doesn't keep tipping over. And then we'll just use up the media that's got the most moss in around the top, because the top of this plant was drying quite badly, and obviously the production of new roots comes from the top of the plant, and if the top of the plant is dry, even though the roots are moist lower down the pot, those roots can fail because they come out into the top of the pot which is dry. So to all intents and purposes they think it's dry. Right, I have still got quite an air gap there, so I'm going to try and gossip. I've got a gap, I'll fill that in. That's better. There is a little bit of an air gap there, but I'm not too fussed because it's much, much smaller than what was there before. Most of the roots are now in good media. Plant's upright, which is what I wanted. So hopefully it will stay upright now. And we'll put our tag back in and hope our new growth pushes on reasonably quickly, because it will produce some roots at some point. I haven't had the plant long enough to know whether the new roots come with the new growth, when the new growth is halfway up, or after the new growth's matured. It could be any combination of that. Anyway, so the potting on mechanism is to go to a larger pot, put your plant with its existing media or a little bit. Oh, I wish I could film that. There's a female blackbird out there with a white collar. It's an aberration, a form that happens to some garden birds. They get white on them. I mean, there is there used to be a blackbird round where I used to live that had white wings and white stripe on its tail. And at a distance you think, what on earth is that? Anyway, that one's got a white collar and a little white throat, so very distinctive, but it is a blackbird. Don't start leaving comments saying it's this, that and the other, it's a blackbird. I've been studying birds since I was 6. Well, some. Inland birds, forests, farmland and all that sort of stuff, not the coastal birds. Right, so where did we get to? So potting on. Old media must be good. And you must know it's good. Don't take the risk otherwise. So if you know you're in reasonable media, you know when you did it, sort of thing, and the quality's still good for another year or so, then you can take your plant out of the old pot, put it in a bigger pot centrally, or slightly offset if you've got new growth around one side and not the other side, and then just put new media down the sides and gently firm it. And you haven't disturbed the roots. in any shape or form. That's potting on, as opposed to repotting, which does disturb the roots considerably. So I just want to tidy this plant up a bit. It's got some sort of dead spiky bits on it. Right, so that's that done, and a sort of little bit about what potting on really is. It just means going to a bigger pot without disturbing the roots in its basic form. That's what you're talking about. Right, let's hope we get some new growths. I can see one. Let's hope we get more. Push this on into an even bigger plant. Because at the moment it might look like a giant Masdevallia, but it isn't really. It's only got eight leaves. 2, 4, 6, 8, 9. It's got 9 leaves. Several of them have had the ends cut off, so those will be the older ones probably that got brown tips. 3, actually 1, 2, 3, 4 have had their tips cut off. Well, let's hope we don't have to do that anymore. 5 have had their tips cut off. I've just seen another one. So there we go. I won't water that today because the moss was wet. And I watered the plant, because this is quite wet, I watered it yesterday. So in a day or two, this new moss will dry because the bark will soak the moisture out of it, summit wicked. And then as soon as that happens, it will get a proper water, a soak. So there we go. That's the video for today. What is today? Wednesday. And you'll be pleased to hear, those that are interested, I had no watering to do this morning. I didn't have very many comments from yesterday's video, and hardly any on the bonsai video I did. So I got cracking on my talk, putting it back together, and somebody said that if you do it a second time you'll probably do it better anyway, and you were right. I'm pretty confident what I've done so far is better. It's a better start than I had before. And I've probably done about 1/3 of it, but the content of the other 2/3, a lot of it I've already put to one side. I've just got to construct it, if you see what I mean. So I've made a big dent in it, and when I signed off sort of thing, I backed it up. I took because the way the project software works is it has a startup file. You can start from scratch with nothing and just sort of pull in some files and do some text boxes, which I do sometimes. When you see one of my videos with that introduction with the music and that, when that's not there, it just goes straight into the video. That's all I've done. I've opened the software up, dragged a few clips in off the camera, put some text boxes in, bang, job done. But some of them I actually open a startup file which has got those words and that music and everything like that, and the ending and my logo that runs through in the bottom left hand corner. All that's already there with gaps, and I drag the new clips into the gaps, and that's a starter file. Yeah, that's the one that went missing for my talk, the starter file, which without that I haven't got anything, because that's where all the bits are joined together. Yeah, so anyway, I backed it up. I just copied it to another folder, and that way the software that did the naughty on the last one doesn't know where it is. It's still where it was, it's still in the starter folder, the named one. It's still there, but if it goes missing from there for some apparent unknown reason, I've got a copy of it. And each time I close down, I'll take a copy of it. So it can't go missing again. Right, see you next time. Thanks for dropping by.